So we have a little bit of practice here with 2.3 talking about equilibriums. And specifically, this practice is going to focus in on surpluses and shortages. So let's take a look at two examples really quickly. Let's say the government sets an effective price restriction at $5 per bushel. And let's say we're looking here at, it's a bushel of corn, the instructions say. So they set an effective restriction at $5 per bushel. Well, first of all, we have to gather some information before we do any of that. Probably the most important piece of information first is we need to find our equilibrium. So if you notice, our equilibrium would fall right here at a price of $4, where we see that the quantity supplied is equal to the quantity demanded. We see that 12,000 is being supplied, 12,000 is being demanded. So at that price, the market clears. If you guys notice, at a price that's cheaper, we see that the amount that people want to buy is greater than the amount that's being supplied. At a price that's more expensive, we see the amount being supplied is greater than the amount being demanded, right? But here at equilibrium, they are equal. So we're paying attention there to our equilibrium. And now that we have our equilibrium, we can look at this price restriction and try to understand what's going on. It says that the government sets an effective price restriction. So we know that it's an effective, it's working the way it's supposed to. And they do it at $5 per bushel. So let's check it out right here at $5 per bushel. Now, if we notice at $5 per bushel, what is going on here? Well, we notice that at $5 per bushel, we see that the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity being demanded. That means more is being made available than people want to purchase. Now, is this going to be a price floor or a price ceiling? Well, again, it falls above our equilibrium, and we know that above our equilibrium, we see that it's going to create a surplus in that case. We'll talk about that in a second. But because it's preventing us from going down to a cheaper equilibrium, just in the same way the floor in your room keeps you from going down, this price restriction does as well. So this is a price floor. It's keeping us from going down to our equilibrium price from $5 down to $4. And so again, is this going to be a surplus or a shortage? Well, let's look here. We notice that at a price of $5, 14,000 is being supplied, 9,000 is being demanded. So we see that more exists than what people want to purchase. So therefore, once those 9,000 bushels are all bought up, we're going to have some corn sitting around left over. And that corn that's left over sitting around is called a surplus. Now, what is the size of that surplus? Well, again, we said we had 14,000 that's being made available minus the 9,000 that people purchase, which means we are going to have a surplus or amount of corn left over of 5,000 bushels, right? So this is actually probably pretty much exactly how you would see it showing up on your test, something along these lines where you're asked to identify, is this a floor or a ceiling, surplus or a shortage, and what is the size of that surplus or shortage. So make sure that you can look at these and kind of identify some of that stuff as you do. So looking at the second example, let's say this is the supply and demand for 2 liters of soda in our small town. So again, first things first, we need to identify where exactly is our equilibrium. And if you notice at a price of $1.75, the amount that's being demanded is equal to the amount that's being supplied, because at that point, those things are equal, right? Now, the government sets an effective price restriction at a price of $1.50 per 2 liters. So we see that it's $1.50 is where that price restriction is occurring. Now, what do we notice at that price, $1.50? What can we say about the quantity demanded versus the quantity supplied? Well, if you notice, we see that the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. That's something that's important to keep in mind. Actually, let's start there. We'll start with that second piece because whenever the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, what can be said about how much soda people are buying? Well, people want to buy a lot more than we have available to us. And what do we call it whenever people want to buy a lot more than what's made available and we don't have enough for everybody? We call that a shortage. Now, we can go back and look at this first one in 2 different ways. We can say we know that shortages are caused by what, or we can say because it's set at $1.50, it's set below our equilibrium price, we know this restriction is keeping us from going up in price to our equilibrium. And what keeps us from going up? A floor or a ceiling? Well, it's a ceiling. A ceiling keeps us from rising. And so in this case, we see that a price ceiling is set, and we know that price ceilings create shortages. And so that checks out. Now, what is the size of that surplus or that shortage? Well, I guess it says surplus or shortage, but we're looking at a shortage here. What is the size of that shortage that's created by that price restriction? Well, we see that 240 are being demanded, but only 180 are being supplied. So if we do some math there, we see that the size of this shortage is 62 liters. We see that there are going to be 60 people who are left over wanting to purchase a 2-liter because the price was so cheap at that price restriction. So again, just make sure that you guys are comfortable with this and you can kind of work through that and determine the quantity supplied versus the quantity demanded at different prices. Do we have a surplus? Do we have a shortage? Are we at equilibrium, or what's going on?